I want to welcome everybody to In the Ring with Kings podcast. We have here Marshall Kaufman with Kings Promotion and co-owner Andrew Foy. We're going to be going over the August 4th show with Jordan White and Erickson Garcia. Marshall, how do you think that show went?
Well, I think the show was great. The fights were great from top to bottom. Uh, I thought the main event ended just the way I love to see a main event end, so that we can move on and get out of there after a long night. But overall, I thought every fight was great. Fight of the night was Paul Kroll against Guido Schramm. I mean, that was one heck of a fight from round one to round eight, and that's a fight that definitely needs to be a return match. And then, of course, our opening bout was Julian Gonzalez from Reading, Pennsylvania, going up against Johnny Spell from Pittsburgh. It was a battle of Pennsylvanians and for the lightweight, super featherweight uh, state championship. So it was a great night, and the undercard was fantastic as well.
Andrew, what were your thoughts on that card? Did you have a favorite?
Well, I mean, I pretty much agree with everything Marshall said. I agree that the fight of the night was Kroll and Schramm. That was barn burner fight from start to finish. It definitely had its ebbs and flows throughout the fight. Um, and great performance by both fighters. Was impressed with the fortitude that Kroll showed. It looked, I kind of felt early on that it looked like Schramm was just going to sort of outwork him and be able to kind of exert his will as the fight went on. But Kroll, he found ways to find openings, create little space here and there, and definitely thought he did what he needed to do down the stretch to pull out the draw. But yeah, it was just a tremendous fight. But a lot of the fights on the card were great fights right from the get go. Our opening fight of the night, Ernie Cuevas versus
Eduardo Diogo.
yeah, Eduardo Diogo, two undefeated fighters. It was a super bantamweight fight, and it was an explosive fight, 6 round fight. Had knockdowns again, ebbs and flows. Both guys, very high level fight in terms of the amateur backgrounds of the fighters and their styles. But yeah, just so many great fights on the night. Great show.
So I want to ask you both about Julian Gonzalez versus Johnny Spell, because Julian Gonzalez has been on a streak of just knockouts, and he's fought on ShoBox a couple times now. Is he at that level where you won't be seeing him knocking as many people out, and he'll be getting more of those decision wins, or was it an off night, or is Johnny Spell someone who can really take a punch and could be a contender later down the road himself?
Well, I think Julian struggled with the movement of Johnny Spell and also the good jab. I think Julian's going to learn and grow tremendously from that fight. It wasn't his best performance, in my opinion, but I think that he's going to learn from it, on learning how to cut the ring off, learning how to get out of the way of the jab and defend the jab and stop the jab, and learn to attack the body a little bit more. Because as you fight these fights that have more rounds into them, the body work is very important. And so hopefully he learns from this fight. And I'm saying that almost like he had a draw or something, but he didn't. He dominated the fight, 6-2 or 8 or 7-1. But I think in every fight you still have to learn from it in order to grow and get better. And I think he's going to get better because of this fight. Uh, will the knockouts continue? We'll see. I mean, I think the kid can definitely punch, but he just has to learn to place the punches at the right time, and how to also weaken his opponent as well by attacking the body.
Andrew, where do you see Julian Gonzalez going for the next year or two?
I see more fights like this for Julian over the next couple years. He's still very young. He's still sort of developing, his man strength, as Marshall and people in boxing say. I thought he fought a great fight. I think Johnny Spell is a is a good fighter as well, an awkward fighter. You know, he has a really good jab, and he sort of has an awkward style in terms of the way he delivers his punches. Um, but you know, despite that, I thought that Julian really put on a great performance. Definitely some things he could learn. You know, he could learn from this fight. You know, do better as he moves on. And you know, I mean, that's the reason that guys have these sort of fights in their career, and you know, don't fight for world titles right away. But I think he's definitely, you know, has the upside to be a world championship contender in the future, and he's going to continue to progress over the next couple years.
No, I agree, and I believe that's why you guys have a series called "Where Champions Are Built," because you guys do have that track record of building champions who aren't signed by those big promoters. So I'm excited to see what guys like Julian Gonzalez are going to do in the future. And let's dive into September 15th because we have the rematch with Joey Deweyko and Colby Madison.
Yeah, that's the first fight was entertaining because I was more so impressed with not Joey, Kobe's performance more than Joey's, uh, and probably not more shocked of Joey's lackluster performance, you know. Uh, but that being said, it was a great fight. Kobe showed that he had a great jab. He busted Joey up. Uh, Joey busted his nose up, which made the fight a little bit more entertaining because there was blood everywhere. But for that being said, it was entertaining. This time there's going to be a little bit more on the line. They're fighting 8 rounds instead of six, and they're fighting for a regional title, for an NABF title. I mean, for a WBC US title. I'm sorry. And so it's going to be a great fight.
So in the lead up to that fight, both fighters predicted a knockout. Andrew, how do you see in the rematch going?
I mean, I think there's a good chance that the rematch is going to be very similar to the first fight. You know, styles make fights, and those guys, um, yeah, I mean, I think they have styles that are both good to fight each other and make, you know, an entertaining matchup. You know, just going based on their previous track records, experience. I mean, it certainly would be terribly surprising if Joey, you know, were able to get a knockout in this fight. But you know, it was surprising that Colby did as well as he did the first time. Who knows? I mean, maybe he's sort of turning over a new leaf. You know, hard to say, but um, you know, I think it's sort of like a 60-40, 70-30 type fight. But you know, the first fight was a surprise, and so hopefully this one will be every bit as entertaining, hopefully surprising as well.
And we don't want the main event, the rematch, to overshadow the rest of the card. So what is one fight that each of you are looking forward to on that undercard?
I'm looking forward to the kid by the name of Muhammad Robinson out of Maryland, who's 6-0 at 140 pounds, going up against another undefeated fighter in Najim Johns from Philadelphia, who's 4-0. You know, guys at this level, they don't need to put their undefeated record on the line, but they are. And so to me, that says a lot. The same way what we had last week when we had uh, Cuevas going up against Diogo, two undefeated fighters. Then we had Francis Oren going up against Ali Ellis, two undefeated fighters on an undercard. You know, where they're not getting paid the big bucks. So I'm looking forward to that fight. I think it's going to be very entertaining, and we'll see. The cream of the crop would rise.
Yeah, I mean, I'm looking forward to that fight as well. Probably, you know, the number one fight on the undercard I'm looking forward to. But just to throw something else out there, I'm also looking forward a lot to Quadir Albright going up against Demarcus Layton. Um, you know, Quadir Albright was sort of coming back off of first loss of his career. You know, around this time last year, we had sort of big expectations for him, and still do. His last fight, he looked very impressive against a good opponent, and this fight is again a little bit of a step up. DeMarcus Layton started his career strong, has had some losses recently to some very high level fighters, including Xander Zayed. And the question for me is not really will Quadir win. I'm anticipating will, but how impressive is it going to be? Relative to some of these other top fighters who have fought DeMarcus Layton as well.
So, Marshall, you mentioned how there's two young undefeated fighters fighting each other early in their career. Where do you both stand on that stigma in professional boxing of staying undefeated as long as you can, not losing that O?
I mean, who wants to lose? Let's be honest. But at the same time, how do you really test yourself? Uh, I think that years ago, everyone wanted to stay undefeated because they thought that was their opportunity to get TV time. But I don't think that's the case anymore. I think, you see more and more fighters, especially on PBC, getting opportunities that have four, five, six losses. So those days of worrying about your undefeated record, in my opinion, are gone.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think that the stigma is out there. You know, I find it sort of annoying. Um, I think it's one thing to overmatch, a prospect early, in their career, because you certainly don't want them to lose confidence in themselves. But at the same time, to fight, I think a well-matched fight against a good opponent, and if the fighter loses, but they learn something, I don't have any issue with that. I mean, we see it in other professional, we see it in MMA. I mean, losses don't really seem to matter that much. The stigma in boxing is annoying. I mean, if you lose and you lose because you have no business being in the ring with that person, then probably that should tell you something.
Right.
But at the same time, I mean, if you lose and it's a good fight and you learn, um, that really shouldn't be that big of a deal. And I don't think it's that big of a deal. I mean, we see fighters with losses, pop all the time. I mean, I don't. I mean, Alicia Baumgardner lost in the sixth fight of her career, and she's on arguably top of the sport right now in the women's game. So, just people that we've had experience with personally, but you see it all the time. So yeah, I hate the stigma. I think it hurts boxing. I think it definitely hurts boxing at the lower at the regional and club level even more than it does uh, at the highest levels of the sport.
Hmm.
No, I
And
I
I
agree with.
also think, forgive me, Jesse, but I also think that like Andrew had mentioned, it depends on the performance of the one that loses. They get blasted out, then you know what you had. But if they put up a good fight like Diogo did last week, uh, then it makes a difference. The same with Quadir Albright. I mean, look at him. He lost. He came back with two knockouts in a row, and so it really depends on what you do with yourself after that loss and how things get changed. One of the greatest fighters of all time, Bernard Hopkins, lost his pro debut, and look what he's done since then. So it's just that whole stigma of staying undefeated. It's bad for the sport, but there's a whole lot of things that are bad from the sport that Floyd Mayweather laid the groundwork for. Because really that's what it seemed like it came from. It seemed like it came from Mayweather days. You know,
Yeah, I was gonna say I feel like it's only just been the last couple decades, really the last kind of 2 decades that was a thing. Because if you just look at the '80s and '90s, you had the four kings, the Hearns, Lettern, Duran. Um, they were all fighting each other.
correct.
All the heavyweights. When it was Lewis, you had Tyson, Holyfield. All those guys were fighting each other. They were all risking that, and then it became a trend that was going around where you had to stay undefeated. And it does, it doesn't make sense from a historical aspect of the sport, or when you compare a different sport like mixed martial arts. It's just not good for the sport. I feel, and it is annoying.
Hey, look at Pacquiao's
Yeah.
trilogy. What he had, and those guys continue to fight. They wanted more. And then you go to Mickey Ward and Gotti. Uh,
Hmm.
the list goes on, and now you see that PBC is trying to make fights among uh, the Charlos and things of that sort. So I think it's a good thing that these fighters that have no losses are taking chances early in their career.
No, I agree. I mean, in one fighter out there who has a loss and is still making all the money in the world is Jake Paul, 7-1, coming off a loss, and the kid is really writing his own checks.
He sure is. And there's so many. Someone told me, I talked to someone today. They said there was probably about 60% boxing fans at his show, and the rest of them were like, kids and influencers. It's more about the whole influencer thing more today than the boxing ability.
So, do you think that that is bringing potential new fans to the sport who weren't exposed because of their demographic and age, and because maybe their parents didn't even watch boxing?
I would hope so. I think that was the initial plan. I think that's what Stephen Espinoza
Mm.
initially thought of when he was bringing Jake Paul on to do their own Showtime shows. Um, so I think that's still, uh, in light of things, definitely bringing more people to the boxing side of it. I mean, let's think about it. I mean, these influencers are boxing. I mean, they probably never thought about boxing a day in their life. Now there's someone else, a TV actor. Uh, I forget his name, but he had like 80 amateur fights, so now he's going to fight on the card coming up soon as well. So you're starting to see more and more people from different walks of life follow boxing.
Andrew, what's your take on Jake Paul?
Well, I guess I mean, I would hope that if anything, I would hope it brings people to the sport. I mean, I don't know that I've seen evidence of that yet, and I personally don't really think that it's going to pan out that way. Um, and I still find it, um, I guess maybe annoying is the word that he's just getting so much attention for what he's doing, and I think it's good for him. It's fine. I mean, nobody's forcing anybody to watch his events or to buy the product when it gets put out there on pay per view or whatnot. But I also think to an extent it's sort of like a symptom of some of the things that are wrong with boxing right now. That instead of people having genuine interest in what's going on at the sport beyond a level like Canelo or a level like Crawford Spence, the biggest thing in boxing right now is Jake Paul. And that's and you could argue Jake Paul's maybe bigger than Crawford Spence, or Canelo. And I mean, I find that personally embarrassing for the sport. And I wish that, people at the highest levels would take a look and sort of try to reflect on why. And I mean, I think when you look at the success of UFC and MMA, I mean, I think the why of it is pretty obvious because I mean, we're not putting on not I mean, at least from like somebody like King's Promotions, it's not for lack of effort, but in general, there's just not enough good fights being put on a consistent basis. The best fighters aren't fighting each other on a consistent basis. Um, we're not seeing the up and comers come up in any sort of way that like gets them in line for championships that really make any sense to anybody. I mean, look at how Boots Ennis is coming up right now. I think is sort of like a great example of that. It should be obvious after a fight like Crawford and Spence that people in boxing should be talking about seeing somebody like Crawford fight Boots Ennis. But you talk to anybody in boxing, and their thing is, well, yeah, but that wouldn't really make a lot of sense for Crawford to do that. He could have bigger fights, with a unification with a Charlo or something like that. And it's like, business be damned to some extent. I mean, that sort of mindset, I think, has killed the sport. I mean, if we could really anticipate a Crawford versus Ennis fight coming up, like that would be in, I think, the direction that the sport needs to go, where the best fighters are coming through the ranks in like a logical way and fighting, lineally for titles. That's what makes sense to people. I mean, that's why every major sport in the world, has a season and a season goes to playoffs and playoffs go to a championship. I mean, that makes sense. Like the way that boxing is operating right now, doesn't really make a lot of sense to an
Well,
average.
I think it also makes sense for just true boxing fans. You know, I want to see Crawford and Crawford and Boots. I know you want to see Crawford and Boots. I'm sure Jesse wants to see Crawford and Boots. But when you have a show like Jake Paul just had, where more than 50% of the people were there for the opponent, for Nate Diaz, not for Jake Paul. They were booing Jake Paul. You know, uh, it's. I think when it comes to that point, it's really not about boxing. It's about entertainment, and that's what they do. They put on a one hell of a show when it comes to entertainment. We in boxing put on great boxing fights. They put on entertainment, uh, and I think that's what the differences between them. You know, they're really not trying to put on great fights. But yet, I have to say, the opening TV bout was one heck of a fight, and the matchmaking that Eric Botcher did on that card was pretty darn good.
See, I'm going to take my little spin on what Andrew was saying about how the playoffs lead to the Super Bowl. When it comes to someone like Boots, why isn't he on that undercard of a Spence Crawford? Why aren't we actually stacking cards, truly stacking cards, and make meaningful shows that are going to lead to something greater in the future? Or even having maybe Boots versus Thurman the week or two before and having cross promotions on those, because one of the great things that I think that the UFC does is they'll have a title fight and they'll have another fight that could literally be a headliner. And boxing just doesn't do that. It's all about the main, and then they're going to kind of throw in, not saying that they end up being bad fights, but fights that aren't going to mean anything for the two main event guys in the future, or that isn't worth paying for every single fight. It's like, would you actually pay for this co-feature? And people want it. Right. I think that's something that needs to change in boxing.
Do you think there's enough of it though? Do you think you have enough of it to do a main event per se like Crawford and Spence, and then have Boots as a co-feature? Do you have enough of those in different weight classes to make that happen?
And I'm not even saying it always has to be like that, but how do we stage them to where people are familiar with these guys? Because I bet you a whole lot of people don't actually know who Boots is, other than the diehards, but they're aware of who Crawford and Spence was.
Right, right. I mean, look, I mean, personally, I did that for the show in Philadelphia. I put James Byrne in with with a kid named Jimenez, and I put Valcoa in with Dahu in hopes that the winners would fight each other on ShoBox, and hoping that I thought it was going to be Bernardin and Dahu winning, and I would have put those two on ShoBox together. Mm-hmm. It didn't work out that way, you know. So, yeah. You know, so I know what you're getting at, but it doesn't always work out the way we want it to work, for sure.
And then back to the kind of influencer thing. If we look at Tank Davis versus Ryan Garcia, on paper, Spence Crawford should have been a way more of a high-profile fight.
Oh, without a doubt.
But Tank Garcia did twice the pay-per-view numbers.
Wow.
They literally did twice the pay-per-view numbers. And Garcia and Tank, from a social media aspect, Garcia is number one. You know, he has that kind of influencer, friends with YouTubers, friends with people in these other spheres. And Tank, he has a massive following too.
But in all honesty, that's why promoters are signing fighters that have a huge following. Mm-hmm. Because it can help market the fight.
Yeah. So how do we kind of mold those two things together versus just not, I'm not hating on Jake Paul, but allowing just somebody to come out of nowhere and he's actually moving the needle in the sport versus these kids who are technically very, very good and they just don't have any marketing behind them.
I mean, I think that to some extent, if the product was consistently good and competitive, some of the marketing takes care of itself. You know, like so. And I hate to keep comparing boxing to UFC because it's very technical. I mean, UFC is just one sort of league of MMA. It's just become sort of like the preeminent league of MMA. and it's very high profile. And it was probably able to do what it did because it came on at a time when the sport was sort of young in its infancy and not really sort of evolved into like these major power players, with like their different spheres of influence, which is what boxing is now. And to get people, I think, at the highest levels to like truly cooperate would be really hard, especially if they're still making money and being successful doing what they're doing now. And I think they are to some extent. I mean, and that's why it's hard to really change things. But at the same time, while I think maybe, you have a top rank that's successful or a PBC that's successful or a matchroom, I mean, I think the sport is hurting, it's dying at the lower levels, which are really, which feed the highest levels of the sport. Whereas, um, but it's not that easy to solve either because I think, Marshall, correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't that sort of the vision of PBC when it kind of came out was that it was going to consolidate all the best people in boxing into one stable and then, I don't want to say be like UFC, but sort of be like the preeminent um, boxing promoter and be able to sort of do the best against the best and sort of the build ups and all those sort of things. But they just couldn't really, I guess you could say, consolidate enough power.
Right. Yeah,
Like
I think that might have been part of their plan because they signed over 300 boxers, you know. That's why
Yeah.
they got sued by Top Rank saying that they were trying to have a monopoly on the sport, you know. Uh, I think that that might have been in the back of their mind. I really don't know what their initial uh, plan was, but it sure enough seemed like it was the same as what UFC was. You know, they just couldn't keep it together, you know. And let's be honest, the same with King's Promotions. If we have a stable of 40 boxers and we have six of them in the same weight division and they all have about the same amount of fights, why not put one against the other and allow the fights to take place instead of having to look outside somewhere else? I mean, it's the right way to go. You know, it really is. It just makes things easier, like what UFC is doing. I mean, UFC doesn't have to go around looking for a fighter at 135. They have
Mhm.
how many of them, you know, and they all seem to fight because it doesn't worry about, they're not worried about whether they have two losses or zero losses, you know. Yeah, no, it's definitely the right business plan, in my opinion, in order to have success uh, among your own group.
Yeah, to me, the UFC is like if Top Rank and PBC joined as one, and
Correct. Well,
there's no
let's add more
competition.
to that. Let's add
Yeah,
top ranked PBC and Matchroom all as one. You know what I mean?
yeah,
That's really
yeah,
what they're like. I mean, they have the MMA fighters from all over, you know. And if
yeah.
somebody falls out within a couple few days, they have someone else that they can replace them with instantly. You know, where like Anthony Joshua's fight fell out with Dylan White, and they had to go outside to PBC to get Hellenius, you know. So it wasn't like they could go within their own group and pull a heavyweight in there. They had to go outside to get someone, you know, which probably cost them a lot more money.
Yeah, Andrew, speaking of that Anthony Joshua fight, what do you think about the drug test for Dillian White?
I mean, it is what it is. It's not terribly surprising. I don't think it's not the first time for him, is it?
No,
I
it's
don't
not.
believe so. No.
So I mean, what is there to say?
My son
So,
Travis said it best. Until they actually punish these guys for doing what they do, they're going to keep doing what they do if they just get away with it. I mean, when he was at the press conference with Luis Ortiz, he said, if I go out and cheat on my wife and she takes me back, and I feel like going out and cheating on her again, and she keeps taking me back, who's going to stop it? He says until she, cracks the whip and makes changes or says I'm done with you, is when maybe I'll stop. He says the same with these guys using steroids. They're going to keep doing what they're doing because they're not getting punished for it. There's no punishment. There's no. Uh, they don't. I mean, let's face it, Luis Ortiz has been caught like 4 or 5 times, and it keeps saying it's an inhaler. Come on. Who else was just recently caught overseas? I mean, that's been a long time history about boxers over in uh, Europe using steroids. Who else was it? Ben, what's his first?
Connor Ben.
Connor
Kind of been.
Ben. You know, I mean, it's an ongoing thing, and it's funny how so many of us felt like Joshua was on it. And then when he came to New York, he was too weak. That's why he lost to Ruiz. Because he wasn't on the juice anymore because they tested in New York. But who knows? It's just at least they're testing everywhere now, and it's getting out there, and they just have to reprimand these guys for getting caught and using.
No, I agree. I do want to give Anthony Joshua credit for taking an opponent on very short notice. In the past, high profile fighters have not been willing to just take on any last minute replacement.
Hilarious is
And
tough.
yeah,
You know,
Hellenius is tough, but at the same time, I feel like Anthony Joshua, his heart's not in it anymore. I mean, it doesn't seem like it's been in it for some time now. And it wouldn't shock me if he's just trying to collect another paycheck.
let me ask
I
you
mean,
this: do any of you guys think that Anthony Joshua has lost his popularity because of his two losses?
no.
There you go. There it goes back to answering the whole about the stigma of being undefeated. Here he
Hmm.
is, has two losses, and he's still one of the most popular fighters in the world,
Yeah,
but
because
you,
if he came to the United States and fought Wilder, it'd be a fucking huge fight.
without a doubt. Without
Huge.
a doubt.
I think though when we talk about remaining undefeated, so I think there's sort of layers to that. So there's sort of like the layer, Jesse, that you mentioned at the top, where you see this sort of hesitancy to lose. You see fighters not wanting to unify titles, things of that nature, maybe because of that. But I think as you go down at lower levels of the sport, I find that to be a bigger problem, at like the regional and local levels, because it's one thing if you're an amateur who's fought internationally, you made the Olympics, you sort of know that this is somebody that has what it takes to get all the way to the top, right? And you can maybe you sort of know what you're dealing with, and it's just a matter of sort of building, their career in the correct way to get them to where they're going to ultimately be. But a problem with this that we have, at like the level of King's Promotions, is sort of working with prospects who maybe they're not blue chip prospects. Maybe they're more like, second, third tier prospects, but they still have potential. But you don't know. I mean, these are people that haven't fought in the Olympics. They haven't fought in these international competitions. They might have 30 or 40 or 50 amateur fights. And you actually, they still need to grow. And maybe that growth requires loss because these amateurs that have fought at the highest levels, I mean, they fought and lost 20, 30 times, in these international tournaments and things like that. It's sort of like that they can deal with it, but it's different, as you sort of change levels in the sport. I mean, I'll tell you, it's a hard time getting guys who are 5-0 and 6-0 or 7-0 to take fights that are going to be sort of appropriately challenging. Maybe they're also going to be cost effective from a promotional standpoint, and sort of help a fighter to sort of
Develop.
appreciate or understand the things that they need to get better at. Because one thing that fighters don't lack is confidence, and it's unfortunate because sometimes it comes at the expense of them becoming better and learning and doing things, and learning from mistakes. And so, like, I can't explain how that whole loss thing, like if you say a Floyd Mayweather, how that necessary carries over to a lot of the fighters that we deal with who they're not, you know, Marshall, do you agree with that? I mean, it's almost like it seems to me, at least, there's different levels to this sort of thinking.
Well, yeah, I mean, for some of those fighters, like let's say like a Tanji Teasley, okay, who don't have the big amateur background, but then when you look at somebody like a Yuri Cedeno, it's different. Okay, Yuri Cedeno, being 6-0, he's ready to fight a guy, 28-2, 28-3, things of that sort. But the guys like Quadir Albright, who had, I think he had a decent amateur background. I don't know what it was, but he didn't win any nationals. But I think that loss made him stronger, made him learn from it. Sometimes guys are forced to learn. They unfortunately they don't. Uh, they feel like as they're winning, they don't need to apply themselves anymore. They don't need to do the extra homework, or they don't need to do the extra road work that it might take because they're winning, they're winning, they're winning. What they fail to realize is that their promoter is putting them in the right position to win because it's an investment. But the minute they lose, that's when they look in the mirror and go, "Wow, I need to make a change." Sometimes they look in the mirror and blame themselves and make those changes. Other times they look in the mirror and they want to blame me or their trainer or whoever else. So it's really important sometimes to see how they grow from that. As Andrew mentioned earlier, Alicia, when she lost her first fight, look what she did from there. She went on to become undisputed from there. So it's really a matter of the individual and how they grow from it.
Yeah, Andrew, I'm going to have to say that I agree with what you were saying because I was a licensed matchmaker in the state of Nevada for 3 years, and there'd be times where I would want a 8-0 kid fight a 7-0, and the B side kid would say, "Well, I'll just fight him later in my career," and it's like, but there's no money behind you. You're 7-0 over 4 or 5 years. He's 8 or 9-0 in the last 2 years. There's no money for it to be later in your career. It's just not going to happen. Or there'd be, we'll just say a 9-0 kid, and I'd be like, hey, this kid's 10-1. It'd be a good fight. And then the 9-0 kid's like, well, why do I got to fight him now? Can't we? Let's just wait. Let's just get someone different. And it's like, it doesn't really work that way. There's not just a Rolodex and a plethora of fighters who are raising their hand for every show.
Mhm. And
It's like we want
here's
you to fight this so we can all discover what we all got.
here's the other thing too, Jesse, is that what they don't understand is that you as the matchmaker who works for the promoter is trying to put the fight on for one of many reasons, but sometimes you're putting the fight on for their growth. Okay.
Hmm. Yep.
I've often done it where I put a guy together that's undefeated against undefeated or one with one loss so that they would grow from it. Not so that they would lose, that they would probably be challenged, but they would grow from it. And that's what I did with Quadir Albright. I put him in with a tough Mexican kid who I felt like Quadir would win this fight, but it's going to be a fight that he's going to have to dig deep and learn how to do things differently. He's going to have to learn to box. He's going to have to learn to hold. He's going to have to learn to walk the guy back. He didn't do that in that fight. The fight was a barn burner, but he got stopped in the fifth round because he didn't learn those important values during that fight. I think the real test would be shown when he fights another guy like that again to see if he's learned from that. And one thing they don't realize is when you're making those matches, you're doing that for their development, for the promoter's development, for the promoter to build his business, because as the fighters win, we win. You think we want them to lose? We don't want them to lose. We want good quality fights, but we want our fighters to grow. And they don't have that opportunity to grow in the amateurs no more because they're pros now. So we have to do our very best to put them in the right fights to help them grow. And I've learned that over the years from watching Brad Goodman do
Yeah.
things. If a fighter, and I've also heard Carl Moretti tell me before as well when we were with Top Rank, if the fighter's struggling with the guy who moves, get him another guy who moves. Learn him, get him someone in the gym who he's practicing with so he can learn from that. So and I don't think it's important for a fighter to take three steps. Take one step at a time. And I think we saw that we were talking about Julian Gonzalez. We saw that when he had a draw with Jimenez. Jimenez later on moved up 5 pounds and went on to beat James Bernardin later on, So I've seen growth in Julian from that draw. Would you agree with me, Andrew?
Yeah, no, and before you mentioned it, I was going to actually mention that as an example as
Yeah.
well. I mean, I think that was Julian's third or fourth fight. He had, I don't want to say easy knockouts because he looked impressive and it's not like a few of those other fights even before that. He had fought some guys that we at least expected to test him in some ways. It just didn't pan out that
Yeah,
way. But
Julian was actually 6-0 with 6 KOs, and Jimenez was 7-1, and a good Cuban fighter on top of that. So, uh, but he got the draw, and he got the draw and he learned from it. So we have to see, it's all about developing your fighter, and sometimes they don't see that. They rather some of them, like you had mentioned, Jesse. Some of them just want that. Oh no, when I'm 16-0, I'll be ready to step it up. But do you know that when you're 16-0, it's going to cost me X amount of more dollars, So,
Hmm.
and really, are you really going to be ready for a step up? So that's the difference. Then you see guys like Paul Crow, who's 10-0, who just fought somebody 16-1. So it's and the reason why Paul Crow can fight those level fights. Paul Crow also has a win over Santa Maria, who was probably like 18-2 or something at the time, and Paul Crow was like 8-0. But
well, and
he had
Paul also
had a big
had.
amateur background.
But he also has the win over the New Jersey kid early in his career, who I'm blanking on the name.
Yeah, I know. Shenard Bunch.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But those are developmental fights, and we need more of that today, so that we, the small promoters who don't have the big bank accounts, uh, know whether or not whether what we have is a true fighter, someone who can become a world champion, or someone who's just looking to look good in front of their hometown fans and say that they were a boxer with an undefeated record. That's not something that we want at King's Promotions. We want fighters who can eventually grow to become a world champion.
And I think the most important reason that we need those kind of fights is because we need to draw general sports fans who might like boxing to come to our events, and not just friends and family of individual fighters, which
Right.
is, another thing. And I don't think anybody, locally or regionally puts on the kind of shows consistently that King's Promotions puts on, but we still struggle. I mean, we still struggle with this, in terms of drawing general fans and selling tickets to the fight when people aren't buying them sort of through the individual fighters. But if you look around at what kind of constitutes professional boxing matchups in a lot of places, I wouldn't blame people for not wanting to buy tickets. And so it's a challenge and it's a struggle. And I think to turn it around, people need to know that they can, when they go to a professional boxing match, it's not different than if they go to a minor league baseball game or something like that. They can still expect professional level competition, for the money that they're paying.
Yeah, and I think you guys are getting that reputation built up of putting on fights that are always competitive and people are going to be entertained. They're not looking at one side of the corner and betting every time that the guy in the blue is going to win or the guy in the red's going to win every single time, like most shows.
Hmm.
And Marshall, like you were saying, one of the things I learned from Brad Goodman and Bruce Trampler is it's about finding the right guy. They just always say, find the right guy. And speaking of finding the right guy, Clarissa Shields thinks Keith Thurman is the right guy for her to outbox. She tweeted a week ago that she wanted to fight Keith Thurman at 154 pounds simply because she thinks she can outbox him.
I think she's delusional. Okay. Uh, I mean, look. Is she one of the greatest female boxers of all time? Yes, without a doubt. But and I guess you gotta respect her for the fact that she wants that challenge. The same way I respected Canelo when he decided to go up to 75 and fight Bivol. You know, I thought he was crazy, but you have to respect the
Mhm.
challenge to be great. So I guess I should take back to saying that she's delusional, but she uh, she believes that she can beat him. You know, he's not a big puncher, things of that sort. But I think that Keith Thurman definitely dominates her, in my opinion, if it would ever happen.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you know, I feel bad for Clarissa because there's just not a lot of really high level competition at her weight. Um, and I mean, at least I would I would guess that that's the reason she took to MMA not that long ago was because there's not enough fights to be made for her right now, and that's I mean that's nobody's fault. I mean it is what it is. But I don't think she could compete with a world championship caliber male fighter around her weight.
I personally think her best bet, if she wants to continue proving her point as a boxer, would be to move up to 160 and fight that Shadeja Green, uh, something of that sort, to take those type of challenges, or try to move down to 47 and fight a Chantel Cameron if she would ever move up, things of that sort. But to try to cross over and fight a male, I think that's a little bit too much of a challenge for her, in my opinion.
Do you think she genuinely believes that she could beat him, or is
I
it just hype because there's no reality in it ever
No,
happening?
I think she believes it. She called out Thurman for a reason because he's been inactive, he's been injury prone. I think she truly believes it. Hey, look, she fight? Yes, without a doubt. But does she spar with men? I'm sure she does all day long. But when you put those smaller gloves on and you're actually fighting a man, I'm sure things are going to be totally different. But I believe she believes it because she's full of confidence. That's one thing she doesn't lack is confidence.
Yeah, no, I think she believes it too. I mean, I'm sure she believes it. But I mean, I don't think she even has any knockouts as a professional. Am I right? I mean,
I think she has one.
One
maybe
TKO.
yeah. So
Yeah.
how many knockouts does Keith Thurman? Now, granted, I mean, Clarissa has fought, really only other sort of top women since she's become a professional, but there's not that many of them. I mean, how many knockouts does Keith Thurman have in his career? Probably 20 or 30.
I just can't see a female going in there and boxing on on an equal level against another male. I don't see it. Weight for weight, same ounce gloves. I just can't see it happening
Oh
on
no,
a
me
top
neither.
Well,
on an elite level.
okay, yes, yeah. I mean, I could see it happening,
On
just
an
not
elite level.
another elite contender. Yeah, I
Right.
agree. I agree.
Like I could see Carissa could fight, a Rowley Lolo. Okay, if you look at it like
Yeah.
that, that's different. But for her to fight someone of a Keith Thurman status, I just think it's a little bit too much in my opinion. But hey, she's proven us wrong before, and she's went overseas and beat Savannah Marshall and made a heck of a fight. So, hey, look, if they can make it happen, I'll watch it.
Oh, I think he stops her in 3 rounds.
Yeah, I would
I
watch it.
really, really do. I would watch it because she has said some very outlandish things in her career.
Oh
Some
yeah,
things
without a
that
doubt.
kind of, I was close with her management for a while, and there was things where he even was scratching his head. Not sure why she said that, but she is who she is, so she's going to
Yeah.
speak her mind.
I
But
mean,
it's like what
I don't
Andrew
want
was
to.
saying. It's like what Andrew was saying about her. There's a reason why she went and signed on with that MMA. she's searching yet for how can I say it, like greatness in a sense. You know, she's searching for acceptance from
Mhm.
the world of entertainment. You know, and she doesn't have that, so that's why I think she's reaching out for the Thurman type fight.
And I'll be honest. I mean, I don't, I don't think Marshall or I want to wade into like culture wars on a boxing podcast. But as a medical doctor, I don't think I mean I wouldn't be comfortable with something like that, and I would challenge, anybody who would be comfortable with that, or to really think about it and think of the potential repercussions of. I mean, we've seen terrible, traumatic things happen in boxing, but I mean that would I think be a whole nother level of bad if something like that were to get sanctioned.
Mm.
Um, I would just have real concerns.
Yeah, and I don't think it will. I mean, what the heck?
Completely agree.
If they're not making women's boxing 3 minutes, they're not going to make have a woman box a male. So I just
Yeah,
don't see. Yeah,
regardless of credentials.
correct.
So what did you guys think about the Spence Crawford fight? I mean,
I was disappointed. Uh, I made someone a little $5 bet and I lost. But
and still haven't
yeah,
paid.
yeah, I haven't paid you that $5 yet. I know. Uh, but I was disappointed because I really felt like Spence was going to do more. Um, and I don't want to use this as an excuse now, but afterwards, he definitely looked like he had neurological damage, you know. Uh, but not to take anything away from Crawford. Crawford is special, and he showed that.
Yeah, I mean, I would have the same takeaway. I mean, the only thing I would say, is that I was disappointed just because of how one-sided it was after all of sort of the build-up and the back and forth after so long. And I wonder to an extent, is some of the things that, now again, I don't want to harp on just negative things, but is the fact that, these guys just, they're not active enough, they're not, competing enough. I mean, do we get fooled into thinking that Spence is more competitive than he really is at this point after what he's been through in his career and whatnot? I mean, I thought the match was horribly one sided, you know, for being theoretically a match between the top two or two of the top five pound for pound fighters in the world.
I
Let
mean,
me
looking at Spence's resume and Crawford's, they are the top two guys. And
Yeah, but when did
let me
Spence
ask you,
fight last?
Jesse. Jesse, let me ask you, since you and I made that wager, did you think it would be as lopsided as it was?
no,
Right.
no. I
Right.
thought there was a possibility that he could stop him, but way late, and it be competitive though in the beginning to where it's you're on the edge of your fucking seat. But
Yeah.
it
But
wasn't.
but
It was more of an awe.
Yeah. I agree.
but let me play devil's advocate for a second here. Who was Spence's last win against?
Ugas,
Why did anybody care about Ugas? Who did he beat before he fought Spence in that fight?
Pacquiao,
How old was Pacquiao?
102. I mean,
I
yeah,
mean, like I mean, really. And then who did Pacquiao beat to get to that fight with Ugas that anybody cared about?
Thurman.
That's
Yeah,
right. So
he just
we're
beat
playing
Thurman,
degrees of
and
freedom here. I mean,
Thurman was undefeated.
You really put my mind to work here.
but
Okay.
but like
But let's go
now,
before
so
let's go
so so
before.
that's 3 fights ago, and
Yeah.
now we have Clarissa Shields calling out Keith Thurman for a fight. I mean, maybe he wasn't really what we were thinking he was because of the BS involved with all
Yeah,
this.
but
He
let's
really
back.
put a number on Ugas.
But there again, you gotta look. Styles make fights. Look, let's go back. What about Danny Garcia? Okay, he beat Danny Garcia before that. And if you want to say Thurman isn't that much, who did Thurman have a battle with and he won a close decision against Sean Porter,
Hmm.
who Porter went in with Crawford and was in the fight up until he got stopped. So,
I mean, that the fight between Porter and Crawford wasn't nearly as competitive
oh
as
no,
Porter and Spence.
that was tight. Do you remember that, Jesse?
Yeah, Porter and Spence
Porter
was a
and
split
Thurman.
decision.
Yeah, that was close.
Well, right, but we're saying Porter and Thurman, but I'm saying
But
like
Porter and Thurman was close too.
Yeah.
sure, but then when Porter fought Crawford, that wasn't that competitive.
Sure, it was. It was very close until Crawford stopped him.
Yeah, Crawford's corner even told him at one point that they thought he was down. And he was
Yeah,
like, "What? I'm down?"
and
And
then
then
he
he
went
went
out.
and
I think
dropped
he
him
went out the next round and dropped him
and
the
dropped
second
him.
round.
Yeah.
So styles make fights. That's why you have to wonder though, as well, how damaged was Thurman really? You know, people always talked about the accident and whatnot, and
Spence.
I didn't want to believe it because he beat Danny Garcia after the accident. He beat Ugas after the accident. I personally didn't want to believe it, but based on his performance and how he talked afterwards, I'm thinking maybe he did have neurological damage. I mean, his head looked like he had lumps all over his top of his forehead. Like it just didn't look right. I mean, he was looping
But
someone with all that amateur experience, with Olympic experience, to loop his left hand the way he was looping his left hand and falling off balance just didn't look right. And I don't say all that to take anything away from Crawford. Crawford did what he was supposed to do. But would you agree, Jesse? I mean, you were a Crawford fan, but would you agree that Spence just didn't look right?
Yeah, he did not look like against Ugas, he looked sharp. He was doing the Spence thing. And he just did not like how Crawford said he took away the jab. That was their whole plan.
Right.
He once that jab was taken away, he couldn't. He looked lost. There was a
Yeah.
point where he just looked lost in there, like I don't know what to do.
And that was early after the first round.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was. He landed one good shot, I believe, in the first round on Crawford, and maybe it was the second round. But then after that,
Yeah,
it
you're
was
talking
he
about the
didn't.
overhand. You're talking about the overhand left.
And then that's all he was trying to throw again.
That's it. Yep. And it was looping. It was sloppy.
Yeah.
He was falling over. It was bad. So that being said, you got to look at it. But it's I think that's what the end result was. But who none of us will probably know unless it comes out. Uh, so who knows? But not to take anything away from Crawford. Crawford was special. He really was, and I think he is special. And I have a ton of respect for him uh, now compared to what I had prior to the fight.
Yeah, I'd like to see Spence fight like Thurman at 54. Go up in weight. He's a big boy. He's been fighting at 47 his whole career.
Correct.
Just go up.
Hmm.
I think it's time for some fresh blood. I'd like to see Crawford and Ennis.
Do you guys both think Boots is actually ready for that much of a jump up?
Yes.
I do. I do. He proved to me. Look, my biggest question mark on him was his chin. Okay, and Villa can punch. Maybe Villa's not as sharp or a devastating puncher like Crawford is, but Villa can definitely punch. And he took it on the chin from Villa, and that was my biggest question mark from Boots. But I've seen the kid work in the gym with one hand for 12 rounds. I mean, with two or three different sparring partners. Then he'd go one hand with his right hand lead, then he'd go one hand with his left hand lead. It's just the kid is an amazing talent, and he works hard too. So I think it would be very competitive. Uh, but who knows? Also thought Spence was going to be very competitive. I like to see Jermell Charlo and Crawford. I think it will give Crawford that opportunity to go after another undisputed at 54. But I think that would be Crawford's limit going up to 54.
Yeah, I believe he's stated publicly he has no interest in going to 60.
Correct. Yeah, I saw that interview.
Yeah, but 54, I think him and Charlo, I think it's great.
Hmm.
I think he beats Charlo, depending on which Charlo shows up, because Charlo's looked very sharp. And then what was it? Brian Costa
Castano.
Costino. Yeah,
Yeah,
there was a couple times where he just didn't look the same in there. But
right.
we'll see. We'll see how he shows up versus Canelo,
Hmm.
because he has to go through Canelo first before there's a Crawford fight.
There's a lot of fights out there,
That's but
that excite me as a fan. But until promoter A, promoter B, and promoter C can work together, it's going to be hard for us to really get to see all those great fights.
But in all honesty, I think that if Charlo does fight Canelo and jumps up 2 weight classes, you know, I predict he would lose that fight, and it may be fairly one sided. Now, do you think people are going to have that much interest in him coming back down and, and fighting Crawford? I mean, yeah, technically, I guess he'd still be undisputed if the sanctioning bodies let him keep the belts that long. But I don't know. That to me isn't all that compelling. It's sort of like when
Right.
Kell Brook, fought
Triple G.
uh, Triple G and got his eye socket broke, and then he went and defended his title against
Against
Spence.
Spence.
Spence,
He got his
right.
eye socket broke again. I mean,
Right.
like, I don't
No,
know. You can sort of trace a
no,
lineage back from some of these things.
what you're saying makes a lot of sense, Andrew. But from what some boxing insiders are saying, they think that Charlo has a good chance of beating Canelo because of the style of fight. Have you heard the same thing, Jesse?
I think Canelo's too slick. I mean, you watch him fight Jacobs, Jacobs couldn't hit him. I
Right.
think he's too slick for Charlo. I think Charlo's going to tag him a couple times. It'll be, he's not going to drown, but I think Canelo's going to beat him. And I think that Charlo isn't big enough of a name that when he loses and goes back down for Crawford, that it does the pay-per-view numbers they're going to want, like Andrew's saying, because he's not like an Anthony Joshua, where if he loses, he could still get the Wilder
Oh,
or
yeah, no,
or
I
Tyson Fury
agree.
fight.
In
I
order
don't
for
think
that
it
fight
has
to,
that same thing.
yeah, in order for
But
that
like,
fight to be big, it has to happen now.
And the WBO already said they're going to strip him of his title immediately following the fight, Charlo, regardless if he wins or loses.
But you know who's in line for that 54-pound title?
I
Tim Zoo.
forget.
Tim
Oh
Zoo,
yeah, they're going to make him.
the champion.
He's interim. They're going to make him
And
full champion.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Hmm.
So does
you
Crawford
know,
fight him next?
I just got to say, I don't like the amount of time it sort of is taking for these guys at the highest level of the sport to to fight. To be quite honest, and I don't think it's really good for them, and I don't think it's good. Now look at the on the one hand, boxing's a brutal sport. How many times is it good for your brain to compete, at the highest level on a regular basis? But there's a reason why in every other sport you don't have off seasons that last 2 years, right? And I think that the more time these guys spend, truly out of competition form, and then they try to build back over, let's say a couple month period. The older they get, I mean, you can't do that to your body. You can't, go and ride horses for a year and a half and play golf, and then over a 3 month period, think you're going to drop 40 pounds and be, at the highest, you're going to be competitive at the highest level of the sport. I mean, we see it happen, but it to me it devalues some of these fights because of how long these guys are going between between competition. I mean, Crawford obviously showed he could do it, and he seemed like he still maintained a very high level. But you have to wonder with Spence, you add the accident to it, like who he's been fighting, the amount of time since his last fight. I mean, I think those things really start to add up. And now we're seeing the same thing happen with Charlo. I mean, obviously injuries involved in that, but I mean, how long is it going to be? I mean, wasn't it a whole year between the Castellano fights?
Yes. Yep. A whole
So I
year
mean,
for the rematch.
yeah, I mean, we're talking about a guy who's fought, at the highest level maybe once, and then every 3 years. I mean, like
So,
that's not good for the sport.
so you're saying physically they won't be the same, but mentally, it probably helps them because they're not getting hit in the head as often.
Yeah, and I mean, like from a neurocognitive standpoint,
Right.
30, 40 years from now, it probably is good for them. But, you know, from like a physical competitiveness level, I think it hurts it.
And Charlo's only fought once a year the last 4 years.
Mm. Yeah, that's not good.
No. The last time he fought two times was 2019, and he fought Tony Harrison. And then he fought once 2020, once 2021, and they're almost exactly a year apart. And then 2022, and then now Canelo.
And I mean, that's sort of the point that I was making with like the Crawford Spence. It's like in our minds, we're building this up to be this mega test of the two best boxers in the world. But like, trace what's happened with that one boxer over the last 5 years, and you see that Spence had a major traumatic accident and really fought 2 times, maybe, and not really against people that, you know, I don't, they weren't probably the best either, to be quite honest, given
But,
at points in their
but
career when he fought.
with all that being said, let me ask you this. This is something totally different, both of you guys. So do you think a young Olympian who might have 5 or 6 fights is ready to fight guys who's like 20-1, 21-2, 21? Do you think they're ready for that type of step up coming from where they're at? Almost like what
Are you're
Lomachenko
talking
did.
about an Olympian who medaled, or just someone who got to participate
Yeah,
in the
just an
games?
Olympian
I
in
mean,
general. Just an
so
Olympian in general. You know, like what they did with Lomachenko, what Andy Cruz is doing now. Do you think? What do you think about that concept of what they're doing by putting these guys in big fights right off the bat?
Those guys. If Andrew, you want to go first?
So what I would say is yes, they're very close, and I think that it would probably be better for everybody in the sport in general to condense these guys' careers a little bit of time, but just to make them much more active within a short period of time and like get all this condensed into like a 5 year career, and then we would see, I think a lot more of the best fighting the best, and you know not all this BS at the top of the sport.
Right, right.
I think
That's a radical concept, to be honest. But
Yeah,
I do think it would be better.
I do too. That's why I asked it. I mean, I think it's better to see these young guys fight. They're already at the top of their game, being in the amateur at the Olympic level. So why hold them back? It's not like there's any learning process anymore. They did all their learning in college, in a sense, in the amateurs.
yeah. When you look at the guys like Cruz, Lomachenko, even Triple G, he had over 200 fights. Some of these Cubans, old Soviet Russian countries, they are ready, and they have so many miles on their bodies, regardless if they're only 25. I mean, you know, Marshall, boxing age is different than the age on your ID because it's all
Right.
about the amount of miles that you have in the body, and they're ready. I've seen, and I'm sure you've seen, so many Cuban fighters turned pro in the United States, and they're almost going at it, just rolling with the punches. They're kind of just going along with the motions because there isn't a challenge,
Correct.
and they are Olympians. I've seen silver medalists,
Right.
just kind of these Cuban kids because they had so many. They're just kind of just going with the flow, going with the motions of things, and then it's like they just kind of burn out. It's like, no, get their asses in there.
That's right. No, I agree. I'm asking that because of our fighter Yuri Cedeno, and I believe that there guys like that are ready for the top tier boxers.
Yeah, and like we were talking about the matchmaking, you can find the right guys with those records of
Mm-hmm.
18-3,
Yeah,
22-2,
yeah,
the 27-5. You can find those right guys,
I
just
agree.
doing your matchmaking and set them up for success. And then next thing you know, they're ready for that world title or number one contender.
Correct.